Good morning. Welcome to our Women's Legislative Roundtable. I'm Deb Wake, the president of the League of Women of Virginia, and we are so happy to have you with us on the first day after crossover. Leading our session this morning is Denise Harrington, our advocacy director.
Thank you, Deb. Okay. Hi, and good morning, everybody. So let's give a wave. Yay. So we have everyone here, and we also have Richmond Metro in the house. Yay. So we are grateful. And of course, you know, Deb represents Fairfax League. And then I'm here with Williamsburg League. And all of you are here from all over the state. You representing your league. Thank you so much for coming. And so, you know, our theme today is support the right to marry and gun violence prevention. So those are our themes today. And one of the things that I would really like to start with is not only is she a delegate in the 68th district, but Dr. Dawn M. Adams, or Delegate Dawn Adams, is a nurse practitioner. And nurse practitioners, I have one that's wonderful, and a lot of you have utilized them, and their skills are very good. And they just provide so much for the healthcare profession. And so at this time, we would like to have our first speaker for today, Dr. Dawn Adams, come. I know she's, I think, virtual.
Yes, we do have a representative from Delegate Sickles' office, and he was first, so he has joined us, so he might be able to fill in. I think she's on, but she's preparing for her news conference.
Okay, so that's great. If we have, let's see, by the way, so Delegate Mark Sickles represents the 43rd district. So if we have Delegate Mark Sickles, legislative assistant, by all means, I see you, Andrew Millan, take it away. Thank you.
Yeah, I know Delegate Sickles is hoping to get on here in just a minute, but maybe I can vamp for a minute or two while he gets on.
Sure.
Thank you for all taking the time to listen to different folks this morning on these very important issues. You know, the marriage equality amendment and other you know, legislative efforts around marriage equality have been a very long-term effort, and I know that you all at the League have been instrumental in getting us as far as we have made it so far. And you know, there's one more big hurdle that we have to cross to get the just truly horrific language that's in our Constitution out. That was passed and added into our Constitution back in 2006. So I know that Delegate Sickles and a lot of his colleagues have been working really hard to try to get that language out and either in the short term or medium term get some more positive affirmative language added either into the code or into the Constitution itself. So thank you all for all of your efforts. And I know that Delegate Adams and Delegate Sickles will probably add more about their personal efforts and their personal stories as well. And I'll also double check to see where Delegate Sickles is to make sure that he's getting on. Thank you all.
Do you have any questions, or do we know if we want anybody else? Yeah. Thank you so much. Do we have any questions for Delegate Sickles' legislative aide, Mr. Millan?
None in the chat.
Okay, So if we don't, at this time, it is so, thank you so much, Mr. Millan. We really, really appreciate it. And right now, we're going to go to one of our wonderful partners in coalitions that have been working with us for right to vote and for restoration, as well as working with us on a variety of issues. And that's the ACLU of Virginia. Right now, we have Breanna Diaz, Policy and Legislative Counsel. So Breanna, are you ready for us today?
Sure. Does this order still work? I was told that I was gonna go at 9 now.
Oh, at 9
Yeah.
o'clock?
Well, yes, except Delegate Sickles is not there yet, and
Oh.
Delegate Adams is prepared. So it's just one of those mornings. It's not even a full moon, but we appreciate your flexibility.
Totally happy to. Sorry if it's like really bright behind me. It's like sunny today for the first time in a while in Richmond. But hi, yeah, my name is Breanna Diaz. My pronouns are she and they, and I am the Policy and Legislative Counsel at the ACLU of Virginia. I'm also just by chance a queer and gender nonconforming person myself. And so the issue of LGBTQ rights, including marriage equality, is deeply personal and resonates with my lived experience, as well as the advocacy that we pursue here at the ACLU for LGBTQ rights and equity. So I did like just join a minute ago. And so would someone be able to let me know like what exactly they would like me to address in my limited time with you all?
Marriage equality bills.
Okay, just generally. Okay. And hi, Delegate Adams. It's really great to see you virtually. And I think I'll see you at the press conference in like 20 minutes. And thank you so much.
So Breanna,
Yeah.
so I beg your pardon, but if you need some time to prepare, and we are going to talk about marriage equality. I know Delegate Sickles just came in, and I do see Delegate Adams as well. So we can give you a little bit more time. And Delegate Sickles, are you ready?
Yes, ma'am. I'm ready. I understand you want to know where the 3 marriage bills that I put in are today. Yeah, so none of them were docketed by the speaker. You know, we had 2 approaches this year because last year, when we were ready for the second reference to it would have been on a ballot last fall, last November, but it failed to pass its second time. It had an affirmative right to marry in the constitutional amendment. It not only struck the 2006 Marshall Newman language, it added an affirmative right to marry. So in trying to get something through and get something to the voters, we decided, talking to a few people, that we would put in a strict repeal. Tim Anderson from Virginia Beach also did that. I don't know if he heard we were going to do that, but I was in the paper talking about that. And then he introduced one. And then so I introduced that bill just to give an opportunity to strip the language out of the current Constitution. If you read it, it's pretty horrific in today's world because it doesn't include just marriage, anything that looks like a marriage, a civil union, et cetera. And so I think that would be a great step forward if we could get that on the ballot. That's what the Senate has passed now. And then I put in due to popular demand from my caucus mates, I put in another version that had an affirmative right to marry too, just so people could co-sponsor it to show their support. And that's out there too. Neither one of those 2 constitutional amendments have been heard. Of course, we have the Senate version coming over, which is just to strip the language out. And then thirdly, I have a statutory approach. So if we did strip the language out, we could put in the code the right to marry, you know, another person of your own desire or whatever. And so that didn't get docketed either. So those were my 3 bills. I'm not too surprised, frankly. I mean, I think this is what I guessed would happen. The Republicans believe that they cannot lose one evangelical, conservative, right voter. They have to have all of them to be their base so they can build on that to win elections. They can't abandon the Family Foundation or the Catholic Conference for any reason. And that it's, there's two philosophies in politics. One is you build your coalition, you try to persuade more people to come in and grow it, or you make sure your base is happy and make sure they all come out to vote and see if you have more votes than the other side has. Going to the base, and that, since our country is so divided now, that is a philosophy, and sometimes on our side as well. Let's just get out our side, they get out their side and see who has the most votes, and that is what they're doing. I think it's a wrong strategy. We've got 10 or so. If you look at the new maps that the court drew, we have 10 or 11 seats where I think you're going to have to persuade people. Persuade people to come on your side. Persuasion is a antique thing in politics these days, except persuading you to go vote generally. But trying to convince people that you're right and the other side is wrong is not. It does not decide elections. The smart people say. So I think that's why I think it's a mistake. They're going to have a harder time competing in these 10 or 11 new districts. So. Since my bottom line there is it's all politics, and I think these things will be resolved with time, but that's where we are today. Thanks for the opportunity to say that, and if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to try to answer them. Looking forward to seeing what Dawn says.
Well, thank you very, very much, Delegate Sickles. We agree with you because when we testified for the right to marry, we saw some of those folks that you just mentioned with another coalition. So I'm going to move right along and thank you again, Delegate Sickles. Right now, we're going to go back to Dr. Dawn Adams. She's a nurse practitioner, but she's also a delegate of District 68. Take it away, Delegate Adams. Thank you.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate being here. And I think Mark has provided a really good summary of where we are and why we are where we are. And I think, as much as we try to change hearts and minds by expressing lived experiences, it really does seem that some of these social issues are intransient to change when you have leadership that really is sort of locked into the Christian right sensibilities around politics. And so, it's just super important that we normalize equality in all ways, and that we afford people the opportunity to feel the security of marriage that is both a state-sanctioned institution and one of love. So, I think we had lots of opportunities in the House to potentially let the people speak to this issue, and clearly Republicans decided that wasn't part of their agenda. The Senate has done a great job to support both of Adam Evans' bills, and we'll see if they get any kind of hearing over on the House side. But frankly, I don't anticipate it. There seems to be just a lack of interest in anything that has to do with inclusion and diversity and equality amongst all people. So that is why it's so important to vote, and to vote for people we want to see representing us and representing our values as a society and as individuals. I really thank you for your time, and I appreciate all you guys do to keep people engaged in the political arena.
Thank you so much, Delegate Adams. And I know in the interest of brevity that we are going to, I understand that, again, the ACLU is always on the move, and that Breanna may have to go to a press conference. So Breanna, we'd like to come back to you, and we'd like to hear from you as well in reference to right to marry. Thank you. Breanna Diaz with the, I'm so sorry. I beg your pardon. Just 1 minute. Delegate Watts is in the house, as we say, and she's here to share with us. Thank you.
Okay, you know, it's always a challenge for me to be brief. Let me just say, to follow up on my on my colleagues, just this brief statement as I shared with Delegate Adams following her very powerful statement on the floor yesterday. My husband was a victim of child abuse with 4 broken noses, a broken jaw, which didn't happen from being hit from a swing. And you know my age, his age, he still has nightmares about every 2 months, fall out of the bed nightmares, fearing being hurt. This is the kind of emotional damage that we're talking about when we're talking about meeting the needs of all students, but particularly the needs as were expressed so effectively by Delegate Adams of people who are LGBTQ and are finding their way of who they are within a family that may not understand it. So those emotional scars that child, I wanted to say, are unfortunately lifelong, even with good counseling and psychiatric help. Now, having said that, actually that moves into what I was going to try to quickly touch on. One of the biggest differences between the Senate budget and the House budget is that the Senate does not include the over $1 billion tax cuts. And therefore, what the Senate includes are some very important programs, and I'm going to highlight the that are in K through 12, where we've had so much criticism over this last year about falling scores, et cetera, et cetera. Well, there's a real problem with COVID in all kinds of ways over the 2 years that it affected children at all ranges of the K through 12. So it really concerns me that what we're looking at in the House budget, that because of the money going into the tax cut, we aren't funding some very important programs. One of them, the Senate put in more than $1 million than the total amount House budget for the tiered system of supports that by JLARC and by the Behavioral Health Commission, so that schools can look at student needs, and when we say tiered, know that there are ever more perhaps sophisticated professional help available for those students whose needs are identified by the schools, but which the schools don't have that kind of level of professional staffing. Also, I would point out along that same line is that the Senate added over $57 million to fund specialized student support on the ratio of 4 per 1,000. Now, that specialized can be a licensed counselor, they can be a nurse, they can even be a psychologist, psychiatrist, but 1 to 1,000. And again, making sure that there is that extra support that has professional knowledge of some of the signs that maybe the student is evincing that needs to have special attention and not just be that quiet kid in the back of the room who isn't saying anything. And then also there are 2 other areas and along that same line that bother me that are significantly funded on the Senate side, where they didn't go for the tax cuts, and not well funded at all on the House side. And those 2 are adding instructional assistance in underperforming schools. And again, there was a lot of rhetoric in this last year about reducing accreditation standards. And again, JLARC recommended that this be addressed by the role of the instructional assistants is to make sure that the classroom teacher has that much more additional time to spend one-on-one with students, because there's someone else in the room that is also handling the ongoing needs of the class. And the the House budget only put in $3 million for this, whereas the Senate budget put in $39 million. 10 times as much because they're going after more schools. The House will only put in if you were not performing in at least, I'm trying to get my notes here, I think at least 5 accreditation, whereas the Senate said, no, we've got to step in there when they are showing signs. And so if you're not up to speed on 2 of the standards of accreditation, that's when you would qualify. And that's when we need the help. Not when fail. Oh, finally, we're going to do something about it. And speaking of that, the last thing I would bring to attention, which isn't in the House budget at all, again, because so much money was taken for the tax cuts, and that is to the Senate added $37 million for an additional add-on for at-risk students. At-risk students are defined as those who are on free lunch. And let's be honest, we have a serious economics problem that when you look at underperforming schools, you are often looking at areas of the Commonwealth that are economically depressed, where you don't have the jobs, where you aren't, and of course our minimum wage is not a living wage. So this then, by putting that additional $37 million in, is another very good targeting at what has been so criticized. And you thought there would be real help in there as far as looking at the underperforming schools and doing something about it. Well, again, you see it in the Senate budget where you're not making the tax cuts, but you don't see it in the House budget. So that's pretty brief for me. Don't you think? Thank you so much. Always good to be with you.
Oh, always good. Always good.
Just long enough to say that everyone in this room knows that Vivian is the heroine of this wonderful roundtable.
Well, I love the roundtable.
Yes.
Absolutely. And I just want to add a little bit. I mean, it's outstanding. It is a night and day difference between the House budget and the Senate budget for children and parents in public education. And you highlighted that, and the Fund Our Schools Coalition, which we're a part of, had a press conference yesterday, and it was encouraging certain folks on the House side to say, look, choose kids over corporation tax cuts, I mean, for the profiting and things like that. And they don't realize that people won't even come into Virginia or work if the schools aren't good. So we're not fully funding our kids and we're only funding profiteers, then, I mean, what are we really doing? And I appreciate it. Our values are not, at least in one chamber, just a few people, the values, but in any event, it's just, thanks for highlighting that, everything that everyone is doing for education. Thank you. So now our person on the move again, we thank you so much, Breanna, for your patience. But right now, Breanna Diaz with the ACLU is going to come and talk to us about the right to marry. Thank you.
Great. Yeah, thank you so much. And, I just want to note Delegate Sickles, who, has been the patron of the resolution to repeal and, previously, repeal our marriage ban in our state constitution, in the Virginia Constitution, and replace it with an affirmative right to marriage. He covered the issue so well, naturally, as well as the current status of his resolution. As he mentioned, unfortunately, it wasn't even docketed this session. Delegate Adams also greatly touched on the issue. So I don't want to add anything more than what they've said, but I can briefly touch on, the ACLU's commitment to this issue. And that, the ACLU of Virginia has a long history of fighting for, whether it's through courts, whether it's at the grassroots level, public education, narrative shift work, of fighting for marriage equality across the board. I know our affiliate is well known for our litigation regarding Loving v. Virginia, which is the Supreme Court case that struck down bans on interracial marriage. And starting as far back as then 1969, and going to this moment now in Virginia, where we have in our state constitution, I keep saying state, y'all, I'm so sorry, I'm from Texas, so we're not used to Commonwealth, but here in the Commonwealth, where we have a an antiquated and harmful marriage ban. It's alarming to see that it seems like we still have not learned our history, and that efforts to codify bans and dictating who folks can marry, if they're able to marry the person they love, is antiquated. It's unconstitutional, and it should be up to the voters whether we want to repeal this current same-sex marriage ban. And so it's unfortunate that this session, Delegate Sickles' resolution was not even docketed, so we could even have the ability for it to start the process to bring it to the ballot for the voters to decide. So I just want to note that this is terrible in the situation we're in, and unfortunate that we are, again, voters are denied the opportunity to bring the Virginia Constitution into alignment with today's current law and our values as a society. I'm sorry if I'm repeating information you already heard, but on the Senate side, we do know that Senator Evan, who is patroning the resolution to repeal our marriage ban, that did make it through the Senate, fortunately. And it did have bipartisan support. Republicans in the Senate did support that resolution. He also has the same tactic with the bill to the two-pronged tactic of, one, we'll pass the resolution to repeal the ban, but not replace it with an affirmative right to marriage. Instead, there will be a bill that would codify a non-discrimination provision that, you cannot be discriminated on the basis of sex on who you want to marry. Right. So this is very similar to the Respect for Marriage Act that just was signed into law at the federal level. It's that kind of affirmative, like, non-discrimination protection. Both that bill and that resolution on the Senate side by Senator Evan did cross over and is on its way to the House. We will see if either of those get docketed, seeing as how Delegate Sickles' bill and resolution were not. We'll see, but please know that the ACLU of Virginia will be fighting and meeting with members in the House to try to get it docketed with, Delegate Sickles' blessing and support, because we do believe, again, that, both these bills and resolutions deserve a hearing. They deserve to have a vote and should go through the process that is required for us to change the Constitution, or at least send a bill to, Governor Youngkin's desk to affirm that, no matter who you love, you should be able to marry them. And so the ACLU is deeply committed to that issue. And I think that's really all I can say for now. The delegates truly covered this well. I don't want to repeat anything they've said, but I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you so much, Breanna. Joan, do you see any questions in the chat for her?
No, we don't have any, so we think we've covered this pretty well. Thank you.
Okay, and thank you again. Always happy to hear from folks from the ACLU. Thank you so much, Breanna. So right now we have Delegate Marcus Simon of District 53. And Delegate Simon is going to come and talk with us now. You ready?
Good morning. So what did you guys want me to talk about? Or was I supposed to start, or was I supposed to respond to questions? I'm sorry.
Nope, you could talk about, the two issues today are gun violence protection and marriage equality. So
Very good. So good news. I actually was out last night having dinner, and I ran into the folks from Repro Rising who are celebrating very clearly, because the Senate had some good news. They passed the resolution to add essentially a right to reproductive health care into the Virginia Constitution, right? So a Virginia level constitutional protection on the right to choose. The prospects for that actually getting through the House are pretty dim, but progress on some of these things is incremental. So celebrate while you can. In the House side, the Speaker has not heard any constitutional amendments. We had 20 constitutional amendments submitted, and he pocketed all of them. He referred them to committee, but then didn't have the committee even hear those. And so I said, well, we'll wait and see what the Senate sends over to decide. So since the Senate's sending this one over, I'm going to encourage that we have a hearing on it and see if we can get a vote on it. The other good news, though, I guess, is that the most troublesome of the abortion bills also were not heard in the House. And so it appears to me what's happening is, and I gave a floor speech sort of calling the Speaker out about this, is that the leadership in the House does not want to talk about this issue this year, this election year. I think they can read the polls and they understand that Virginians really value their freedoms and their freedom to have control over their medical decisions, and that most Virginians want to keep politics and politicians out of that relationship that they have with their medical providers. And so, the governor's sort of marquee 15-week abortion ban bill, which was carried by a senior member of the Republican side, also didn't get a hearing. So to some degree, I guess I give the speaker credit for being consistent. He's not giving a hearing to any of these bills. On the other hand, as I've said, it's not really good for democracy. And I think for some of the core values that the league stands for, right, which is to have an informed electorate, let's let politicians vote, show their cards, publicly take a stand on these issues so that when it comes time to face the voters at the polls, the voters have a record, of what they've done and what they've said and how they voted on these issues. So, on the issue, like I said, reproductive healthcare, abortion access, and so forth, it really seems like the status quo, is going to probably hold going into this election. And so then the election becomes, in some ways, a referendum on this, right? Republicans will say, look, we need control of the House and the Senate so that we can send bills to the governor that would actually ban abortion in Virginia after some number of weeks, whatever they pick. And by the way, if they take both the House and the Senate, I don't think 15 will be the number. I think it'll be a much lower number. We'll look more like Texas or Indiana or some of these other states, Ohio. Versus Democrats saying, no, we've got to hold on to the House and the Senate to prevent that from happening and repeat our legislative successes of this year. So again, I think mostly good news on that front from my perspective. I think from y'all's positions on this, good news for you all as well. On gun safety and gun violence prevention, it's been the reverse situation. Not really the reverse. I mean, the Senate has actually done what they said they would do, right? And said, look, we're going to pass some common sense gun safety bills. Senator Boysko and I both had a version of a bill to require safe storage of firearms in homes where children are present, require you to lock your gun up in a safe, lock your ammunition up, or if you're going to keep them together, use a biometric safe that the kids can't get into. That bill passed the Senate with bipartisan approval. It had a couple of Republicans vote for it. It died in a subcommittee in the House. So I don't know that we'll see that bill again. We passed an assault. I think they passed an assault weapons ban in the Senate, something we couldn't do when we had both houses and the governor 2 years ago or 3 years ago. But they passed it this year. But I think that bill is probably, unfortunately, if it gets a hearing at all, won't be a very long one in the House. So on the other hand, the Senate's defeated efforts to repeal our red flag law or weaken our red flag law, which has been a valuable tool in saving lives and keeping folks from being able to allowing police and sheriff's offices all over the state and red parts and blue parts of the state to get firearms away from dangerous people before they can use them to do harm. And so again, the House will send over bills that would repeal local control and keep localities and city councils and stuff from being able to ban guns from their courthouses, their community centers, and their parks. I don't think that those bills will go far. So a lot of, in an election year, I guess, not unexpectedly, a lot of bills that are meant to appeal to folks' bases. As you guys know, on both these issues, I mean, part of what's driving this is there's the general election, which is driving some of it. And I think in particular, the speaker's desire not to have a lot of votes on abortion issues and abortion bans. On the other hand, we have a lot of us in primaries, thanks to the work of the league to get a redistricting process reformed. And we had a couple of special masters who said, we're not looking at incumbent addresses and didn't. So you have a lot of folks paired up. And so a lot of members will be facing primaries or they're in new districts. Even if there's not a pairing, they're in a district where they may represent one or two precincts that they've represented before, but the rest of the district is new to them, which creates an opening or perceived opening by other folks in the community to challenge them. And so a lot of folks facing primaries. And so I think that's why you saw, particularly on the Republican side, a lot of these gun bills passing the House, because that's, red meat for their primary base. They have to show their bona fides on that. We'll see. I mean, the big battleground is moving to the budget. We have had a history lately of legislating through the budget. So I'll be interested to see, I'll be watching out for efforts to sneak either one of these issues back in to the conversation under the cover or under the color, I should say, of a budget amendment. And so, that's something to keep an eye out for, particularly at come reconvene session when the governor has a chance to send down recommendations. Last year, that's how we backslid on our efforts to provide earned sentence credits to people and incarcerated folks, and how we got more legal, what we call gray machines or games of skill. Those are two pieces of legislation that were defeated and then got resurrected through the budget process. So it's not over till it's over. Crossover does mean the end for a lot of bills, but that's, there's again, given the fact that we've sort of given up on this idea that we don't legislate through the budget, there's some of these are zombie bills to say, they just never seem to die. So we'll have to wait and keep an eye on the reconvene session. So with that, I don't know if you guys were doing Q&A or not. I'm happy to hear from anybody, or if you guys are ready to move on to the next person, get out of the way. You tell me what to do.
No problem. We actually have a procedural question that someone sent by private message. Several of the delegates have mentioned the word docketed. A bill has or has not been docketed, and a member wants to know, I really don't know what that means in relation to the life or death of the legislation. So obviously we have a question there. Can you explain docketed?
Sure, absolutely. So and you're asking the right guy. I'm the procedural person on our side. If you guys that watch know me and you see me do that, I see some nodding heads. So people will use the word docketed and referred sometimes interchangeably, but they mean different things. So the first thing that's supposed to happen to a bill after it's filed is the speaker in the House or in the Senate, the clerk of the House or the clerk of the Senate is supposed to refer the bill to a committee, to the committee of jurisdiction for a hearing. And so we actually had some bills that were never referred, meaning the speaker in the House side really just ignored Rule 6 and Rule 7 of the House, which require him to examine the bills and then refer them to the right committee. But he exercised his prerogative as chair and simply did not refer those bills to committee. Now that we're past crossover, because of our procedural resolution, those bills are dead. They cannot be acted on. It's too late for anybody to take them up. So anything that wasn't referred by the House is now not going to pass, not able to be passed this session, absent a vote to suspend the rules or a vote to a unanimous consent to reintroduce the bill. But I doubt you'll see those things happen. Then the issue of docketed is, so once it's referred to a committee, the committee chair then has the decision about whether or not and when to docket or schedule the bill for a hearing. And so on the House side, some bills get sent to subcommittees and then added to a subcommittee agenda. So essentially the act of docketing means putting the bill on the subcommittee agenda and having a hearing, letting folks like you all know that the bill's up, hearing from witnesses for and against and so forth, and then actually taking a recorded vote on the bills. The Senate is long-time practice to hear every bill. Every bill gets a hearing. Some are longer than others. Some are more perfunctory, but every bill gets its hearing. In the House, since a couple of years ago, when we changed the rules to require recorded votes at subcommittee level and things like that, they've used this practice of either not referring or not docketing to avoid having to, it's essentially killing it without having to have anybody take a vote on it. So, but anything that hasn't been docketed and it's still lying in committee or it wasn't referred and still lying on the speaker's desk is dead for the session at this point.
Great, thank you. Denise, we don't have any more questions in chat.
Thank you so much. Let's give Delegate Simon a big round of applause. Thank you. That was
Thank you
excellent.
guys. So great to see you this morning. And thanks for all that you do for the Commonwealth. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. So right now, we're going to have another delegate come, and she's been waiting patiently here.
So without any further ado, Delegate Bennett-Parker is coming. 45th, correct? Of the 45th district. Let's give her a big hand.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the invitation to join you. And I love this hybrid formats. It's nice to see everyone both in screen and in person. So I'm Elizabeth Bennett-Parker. I currently represent the 45th district, which is parts of Alexandria, Arlington, and Fairfax. This is my second year in the General Assembly. Before that, I served as the Vice Mayor of Alexandria. And I currently serve on the Finance Committee as well as the County, Cities, and Towns Committee. So I understood that your themes for today were marriage equality and gun violence prevention. And I knew that Delegate Sickles was going to be speaking to you all. So I figured as one of the patrons of sort of a number of constitutional amendments and bills related to marriage equality, that he would be covering that. So I thought I would tackle some of the gun safety prevention legislation that we saw this session. I'm very strongly supportive of these issues. I'm grateful to all of the advocates from League of Women Voters, moms, and others who have been working on these issues for years and pushing legislators and pushing us forward in the Commonwealth. This session, I was the chief co-patron on Delegate Helmer's bill to ban assault weapons and high-capacity magazines. Unfortunately, that bill did die in the House, but as you heard from Delegate Simon, there is a vehicle coming over from the Senate. Unfortunately, it's likely to face the same fate in the House. And along with co-patroning some other measures that I'll discuss in a moment, I introduced House Bill 1729 to close a dangerous loophole as it relates to the possession of firearms by convicted domestic abusers. And very grateful to the Virginia Sexual and Domestic Violence Action Alliance for all of their work on that bill. So what that bill did or would have done, the Senate version is still alive. Senator Favola has a Senate version. It's Senate Bill 909. But currently, basically in Virginia, because of the lethal combination of firearms with domestic violence, current law does not allow you, if you are subject to a final protective order, or if you have been convicted of basically domestic abuse or assault or battery of a family or household member, you are not allowed to purchase, possess, or transport a firearm. But there's a couple loopholes in existing law, and that there's really no mechanism in place to guarantee that you are transferring your firearm to someone else. So you have to transfer it to a law enforcement agency, to another individual, or to a federally licensed firearms dealer. But there's no mechanism in place for the court or law enforcement to ensure that that is actually happening. Additionally, current law does not prohibit that firearm from being transferred to someone else in your same household. So sort of makes common sense to get that firearm out of the household. So this bill would have simply sort of aligned how we treat this firearm transfer process with how we treat the firearm transfer process as it relates to those subject to red flag laws, and would have had a form basically for the courts for someone to say, here's the name and address and contact information of the law enforcement agency, the person, or the firearms dealer that I'm transferring my weapon to. And so, unfortunately, we've heard this is a really important issue. We've heard from domestic violence survivors that their abusers unfortunately still have access to these weapons, even despite the requirement to relinquish them. And so we think this is an important bill. Unfortunately, like all of the gun violence prevention bills that were sent to the Public Safety Committee, they died in the House. As you heard from Delegate Simon, there are still a number alive in the Senate that will come over. Unfortunately, probably going to face the same fate. I do think we will obviously continue to work on this. These are important issues. I'm happy to go over some of the other bills that we had in the House that died, but I don't know what's been covered before Delegate Simon spoke. And I don't want to necessarily repeat things. So happy to, also open it up to questions there. And I do also want to give some good news. In addition, I think Delegate Simon talked about, some of the bad bills that passed the House have already died in the Senate. And will so that's positive. And then we did actually have one bill get out. It passed the House, not unanimously, 98-1, I believe yesterday. And that was Delegate Lopez's bill to provide a tax credit for the purchase of gun safes. and sort of safe storage devices. So he managed to get both groups like the NRA and I think the Virginia Citizens Defense League, as well as groups like Moms and Brady on board with that legislation. And so it passed the House overwhelmingly. And there's also money in the budget, in the House budget for that as well, I think $5 million. So that is a piece of positive news. And I'm happy to stop there and take questions. I'm happy to talk about other bills. I had a couple of bills I'm grateful for the League of Women Voters support on that I can address. Or
why don't you mention those bills that you'd like us to support? That would be great.
okay. So I'll go with the I'll try to end with some positive news and something that's still alive. So I'll go next to a bill I had, House Bill 2049, which would have extended curbside voting to folks with intellectual disabilities. Right now, Virginia law limits curbside voting to people with only physical disabilities. And we know that there are, it's leaving Virginians behind who have autism or other types of disabilities that affect their ability to enter a polling place. Delegate Simon actually had a similar bill last year that was a little bit broader that unfortunately died. And so working with advocates from the ARC and Disability Law Center and others, we tried to craft a more narrow bill that would have expanded it beyond physical disabilities to bring us in line with the ADA, because currently we are not, but still sort of narrowed that accommodation to folks with disabilities that affect their ability to enter the polling place. So, you know, diabetes is considered a disability. If diabetes was not affecting your ability to enter the polling place, then you wouldn't have necessarily been allowed to use curbside voting. We were trying to find a path forward given what the Delegate Simon's bill died last year. Unfortunately, it did die in committee this year, even on the more narrow version on partisan lines. And I'm grateful to Deb for being there at 7 a.m. to testify in support. So again, we'll continue to work on that. And then the other bill I have, and grateful for the League's support, has been a bill. The Senate bill is alive. The House bill died. The Senate bill is 1351 by Senator Marsden, and that would expand flexibility for local advisory bodies and regional bodies to be able to hold virtual meetings outside of a declared emergency. So I passed a bill last session that allowed this for the first time ever outside of an emergency. It was limited to 2 or 25% of the meetings held per year. And I could speak for the rest of your meeting on sort of the legislative history of how we got there and working with the FOIA Council and working on this issue for a number of years, but have always been supportive of sort of a greater number and leaving that flexibility to local communities and local boards to decide what's right for them, because we're trying to legislate across the entire state and many different types of boards and bodies, and was not necessarily planning on bringing this issue back this year, but had heard from a lot of my constituents, including the Northern Virginia Aging Network, folks with the ARC, other constituents who serve on these bodies, that additional flexibility is really helpful, or would be really helpful, which I completely agree with. We saw during the pandemic, thanks to virtual meetings, a great increase in participation, both by members of the body as well as members of the public. When you're decreasing barriers like childcare and transportation, more people can participate. I know the localities that I represent, heard from the importance of this for school boards as well. Like the Arlington County School Board was talking not only in the dramatic decrease in participation in their advisory committees, but also how helpful this technology can be to doing things like providing instantaneous translation or closed captioning and things like that. Similarly, while Virginia code does not currently prohibit the use of technology like this for members of the public, there can be logistical and financial constraints with that being implemented, again, for these advisory bodies, for your Commission for the Arts or Commission on People with Disabilities. Localities like mine stream our city council meetings, stream our planning commission meetings, might have the ability for hybrid participation by members of the public in those meetings, but these other meetings aren't always happening in places where you have sort of good technology where you can enable that. Similarly, they're not always recorded. I know my school board in Alexandria, my school board was telling me some of these advisory meetings are happening in sort of like the lobby of the high school, which is not set up to record the meeting. So you don't know what's happening if you're not there in person. So my bill died in House subcommittee, but learned last year the importance of having a Senate companion bill. Last year, my bill passed the House unanimously and the Senate version died. We've switched chambers this year where the House doesn't like it and the Senate's okay with it. It did pass the Senate on a bipartisan vote with, I think, about 4 Republican senators voting in favor of it and another one who didn't vote, who would have supported it if she was there. So the Senate version was a little bit more narrow than mine. We amended it after it died in the House to cap it at 50%, trying to just continue moving it forward. So we'll see what happens when that comes back to the House subcommittee. And we're hopeful that that change will help. And then this bill was supported by everyone from the League of Women Voters to the ARC to the Virginia Chamber. Grassroots coalition, like just a very, the ARP, just a wide array of stakeholders who understand the importance of getting more people involved in government. So continue to be hopeful, I guess I'll say there. You're welcome.
Well, we are so grateful to our Delegate Bennett-Parker. Thank you so much. We are so grateful to Delegate Bennett-Parker for sharing that. And we're going to keep the program moving right along. Right now, we have Joy McManus right here with us for the Virginia chapter. She's the Virginia chapter leader for Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America. Take it away, Joy.
Well, thank you so much. This is my second time speaking with you, and I really enjoy. Oh, sorry. Are you getting an echo, or is it okay? Okay, great. So thank you so much for being here. As many of you are aware, I'm the chapter leader for Virginia. I've been the chapter leader since 2021. When I spoke last time, I also shared with you that we are now 10 million strong around the country. We're 10 million and growing, and the NRA is 5 million and shrinking. And we are now the largest gun violence prevention organization in America. In Virginia, locally, we have about 45,000 volunteers with 14 active groups around the state. And again, our role and our purpose is just to work strategically in a multifaceted approach. We address gun violence through federal and state legislative action. We work through local governments for advocacy. We create partnerships with community partners around the Commonwealth. We focus on school safety, public education, as well as electoral action. So just to summarize what we've been doing recently, on January 13th, we had over 250 volunteers and leads around the state go to our annual advocacy day. We had many successful meetings. We were able to bring with us a few of our community partners that were able to really provide compassionate, very personal stories that I think were really affected some of the lawmakers that we spoke to. And that was very good for us to be able to do that and amplify their voices, because those are the voices that need to be heard. I feel like a lot of my thunder has been stolen listening to the 2 previous delegates. They sort of gave you all the updates. I will focus a little bit on something I don't think they touched on too much. As they've both said, many of the bad bills were stopped. And we're not advanced. And unfortunately, though, a lot of the good bills are probably going to face that same fate. Currently, what we have left is the Senate passed the SB 1484, which bans guns in college buildings. That was a 23-17 vote. We have SB 1291, which is the false emergency communication. That passed unanimously. The House, as was just mentioned, passed 2387, which is a $300 tax credit for gun safes and compartments. Currently, our group is reviewing this bill. I think it sort of caught us by surprise, but I will see where we come down on that. But that has passed the House and will be going to the Senate. We have SB 901, the secure storage in cars. SB 909, the disarming abusers. So I'm sorry, I'm going a little fast. I can slow down. SB 901, secure storage in cars. And then SB 909, disarming abusers. SB 1139, secure storage in homes with minors present. SB 1181, Senate's been busy, a ban on ghost guns. And SB 1382, assault weapons ban. All of these were referred to House Public Safety. So we can try to hold out a little hope that something might get out of the House. We will see. We did mention the hope with that tax safe. So we'll see what happens with that. SB 1484 by Deeds and companion bill 2385 by Hudson did not make it out of committee to ban firearms explosives from Capitol Square or any building leased by the Commonwealth. So that was unfortunate. I will take just another minute to talk about the budget. We are asking for support of the budget that has been put from the Senate, which with regards to our gun sense issues. We support the Senate version. It requests $20 million for the Firearm Violence Intervention Prevention Fund, and then an additional $10 million to be allocated to Safer Communities Fund. And this fund benefits communities disproportionately impacted by gun violence. Just to give you a little background in case you're unfamiliar with those two funds, the Firearm Violence Intervention Prevention Fund is a funding source that shall be used for the purpose of supporting gun violence intervention and prevention programs. The funds are made available to agencies of local government, community-based organizations, hospitals, for the purpose of supporting implementation of evidence-informed gun violence prevention and intervention efforts. It includes street outreach, hospital-based violence intervention, and other violence intervention programs. It also will support suicide prevention and safe firearm removal practices from persons prohibited from possessing a firearm, including subjects of domestic violence protective orders, persons convicted of prohibitory crimes, and persons subjected to our substantial risk orders. So that is the Firearm Violence Intervention Fund. And again, that was $20 million from the Senate side. Also, the Safer Communities Fund, this was a federal program that the state benefits from. They receive grants. And so this was funded through the passage of the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. It's part of a $59.4 million total grant funded by that group. And so this would be additional funds for that. The House has not really allocated money toward those two. They are looking at allocating money in a different way. They're asking for 10 times the amount that was already allocated for the Operation Ceasefire Grant Fund. We are hesitant for support of that due to its heavy law enforcement angle. And then the 10 million for a new Virginia Mass Violence Care Fund. Just like most other things, you know, we have no idea how this will go, but hopefully we can at least see some increase in funding in the two programs that I highlighted.
Well, that was very excellent and very extensive, and we really appreciate you sharing that. Could we just give her a great big round of applause?
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. So without any further delay, we will Sexual and Domestic Action Alliance and talk to us. That his name is Jonathan Yglesias. Jonathan?
Hey there, good to see folks. I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person this morning, but happy to see so many folks joining virtually as well, and thankful to the League of Women Voters for offering the hybrid event. Yeah, so Jonathan Yglesias with the Virginia Sexual and Domestic Violence Action Alliance. I know I've done a lot of work with folks in this crew across the state, and much of what I'm going to speak about, I know that you all are very attuned to and very educated on, and we just work in lockstep with you all on so many policy issues and advocacy issues. So very grateful for that partnership. But yeah, I was asked to speak a little bit about the lethal combination of domestic violence and firearms access. As many of you know, I know that you all have not only been a part of leading the charge on some of these policy initiatives, but you've been a part of doing the work in communities as well. It was 2016 when our legislature decided to recognize the lethal intersection of domestic violence and firearms and apply prohibitions on those who are subject to final family abuse protective orders. And that was a huge bipartisan compromise. And since then, there have been more restrictions that have been rolled out in recognition of the fact that the same lethality applies for dating partners, not just family abuse, family or household members. And so that prohibition has also been applied to final protective orders that are general district or circuit court orders, and not just family abuse orders. And bringing us into alignment with federal law and best practices around the nation, there were also moves to create policies in Virginia that apply those firearms prohibitions to people who are convicted of domestic violence crimes, including assault and battery against a family or household member. So our legislature has recognized the unique danger that firearms present to domestic violence victims over the course of the past 6-7 years or so. And we're incredibly grateful for that. But as you know, a lot of this is under threat right now and is currently being undone. So we're grateful to have the Senate in support of these pretty common sense gun violence prevention measures that operate on behalf of domestic violence survivors. One of the things that we keep telling folks, the reason why this matters is we know that people who use violence against intimate partners and family members use firearms frequently as a tool to exert power and control. We know that that happens in incredibly lethal ways. We know that happens in non-lethal ways that is usually an indicator that there is escalating violence. We know that a lot of abusers, and we hear this consistently, threaten to shoot their victims, their children, pets, other family members, co-workers, community members, and themselves. It's estimated that 13.6 American women have been threatened by an intimate partner with a firearm, and 43% have been physically injured with a firearm in the context of domestic abuse. A recent survey from contacts callers to the National Domestic Violence Hotline found that respondents whose abusive partners had firearms, 10% reported that their intimate partner had fired a gun during an argument, and 67% believed that their intimate partner was capable of killing them. We also know that in Virginia, this is where it often leads for domestic violence victims. Firearms are the tool of choice for intimate partner homicides and increased community violence risks. So in Virginia in 2018, the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner reported that domestic violence homicide or intimate partner homicide represented 32%, almost a third of all homicides in Virginia. Furthermore, they reported that most victims of intimate partner homicide were women, 74.5%, and that, as I said, firearms were the lethal weapon of choice. That of those intimate partner homicides that occurred, 65.5%, so just nearly 2/3, were killed using a firearm. Unfortunately, we over the years have been investing alongside you all in more prevention efforts, in more robust gun violence prevention legislation, and just kind of systems-wide advocacy to stop this issue. One of the things that is unfortunate to report is that those trends have remained fairly consistent since the inception of Virginia's Family and Intimate Partner Homicide Surveillance Project in 1999. So that's testament to the fact that we're moving in the right direction, but we really need more bipartisan effort to invest in public health prevention methods, in robust infrastructure to support really common sense measures to disarm domestic abusers. I know that a lot of folks know this as well, so I won't belabor the point, but we also have increasing access in recent years to data that tells us that there is an incredible link between mass shootings and domestic violence. 59% of mass shootings that occurred between 2014 and 2019 were related to domestic violence. And in 68% of those shootings, the shooter had a history of domestic violence, stalking, or sexual assault, or they killed or were targeting a family member, intimate partner in the context of that mass shooting event. So we know that we have, this is not just an issue that is relegated to the home or the family. This is something that has ripple effects on communities, which is why obviously there are prohibitions attached to protective orders, why there's recognition that those convicted of domestic violence and assault and battery against a family or household member should be subject to firearms restrictions. Also, just a quick note, I know that you know, I'm in a group of like-minded folks who know the research and the data on this, but you may hear, you know, the chatter around this has died down in recent years, but you may hear from certain folks that, you know, they believe that a solution might be guns for self-defense, right? And that was something that was a large push back in 2017, 2018 to arm domestic violence victims and survivors. But the evidence does not support the theory that introducing a firearm into those volatile situations makes victims or their families safer. On the contrary, the presence of a gun, regardless of who owns it, regardless of how trained and effective they may be, makes it 11 times more likely that homicide will occur. Gun access is the strongest risk factor that domestic violence homicide will occur. So we also have data that tells us, obviously, that that is not a true solution in these instances. We also know, following kind of that path of reasoning or logic, we know that when we arm survivors, that people respond differently to the violence that they're experiencing and have different flight or fight responses reacting to those crises. We also know that victims of domestic violence are routinely sentenced for long prison terms when they're forced to defend themselves or their families. And that's particularly true for women of color who often face harsher penalties for defending themselves against abusive partners, protecting their children, doing what you do in the context of surviving. So just quick kind of soundbite here, the assumption and message that guns save lives. Not only contradicts what we know about the dynamics of domestic violence, but it also contradicts best available research evidence and public health strategies to prevent fatal violence from occurring. And to that end, I know Delegate Bennett-Parker spoke about the bill that she carried on behalf of domestic violence survivors and advocates this session. SB 909, you know, her bill tragically was very swiftly killed in the House. There is still a Senate version that is alive. Dropping the link here to more information. Senator Favola is carrying that, SB 909. As she mentioned, this would close some loopholes in the transfers process for those who are subject to firearms restrictions. One of the things that we have really been trying to hammer is, and just get into people's heads, is that this bill does not introduce any new policy. All of the contents of this bill are settled policy issues. Rather, it aligns and clarifies existing law. One of the issues that we've been experiencing as we've been going out into communities and working with law enforcement, with prosecutors, with advocates, with all the folks who are, you know, kind of responsible for implementing the firearms laws around protective orders. We have been hearing consistently that there are just wild differences in the requirements between substantial risk orders, protective orders, misdemeanor convictions of assault and battery against family or household members. And it would be incredibly helpful to align all of these protocols so that when we work with law enforcement, with all of our community partners to implement the law, there's one set of rules to follow. And everyone knows what that is. It's easy to understand, and they can do it fairly simply. So that's what this bill seeks to do, SB 909. It is not new policy. It just aligns and clarifies existing law and provides the courts with a little bit more information on the eligibility criteria for that transferee, for that person who's accepting the firearm. So that is what that bill does. We are going to work the House on this. I think that they have a pretty strong, solid, unmovable, unfortunately, blockade against any sort of firearms bills that are coming forward this session. So it may die in the House as well. It's likely to do that, but we're still going to put up a fight. I'm seeing a question here. Do we know if the Second Amendment sanctuary city resolutions passed by some localities has affected disarming domestic abusers? So interestingly enough, we have some preliminary data that, well, first off, let me just acknowledge that was an incredibly frustrating time for many reasons. One of them being that these are many locally elected officials and people, kind of tasked with protecting victims of violence, of multiple forms of violence, who were obviously standing up and saying, we're not going to enforce these laws. So that was incredibly disheartening. One of the things that we found in some of these localities since some of the substantial risk order laws went into effect is that those are some of the localities that are using, I don't think they'd like to, promote this to news outlets, but those are some of the localities that are using SRO laws and protective orders, the firearm prohibitions attached to protective orders most frequently. We still have quite a bit of work to do with some communities, but I'm finding that there are law enforcement who genuinely understand the connections between domestic violence and firearms ownership or access all around the Commonwealth, from Fairfax County to Smith to Lexington, Buena Vista. We have a lot of partners who are understanding that and who are seeking information and training and resources on how to robustly implement the current laws. So a lot of that kind of, from my perspective, was very political, was about showmanship. And when it came down to doing some of the work, I think folks adopted some of the new protocol and worked with their partners across systems to implement those. One final thing I will say, I know I'm going over time here, but there's some interesting resources coming out around the U.S. versus Rahimi case, the Fifth Circuit Court case that, or the ruling that just came out from around the constitutionality of firearms restrictions as applied to protective orders. The Battered Women's Justice Project, the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence, and many national partners are saying that the application of the Bruin test, or the lens that was applied to this particular case, is wildly ineffective and irresponsible, and that this is actually not indicative that the Supreme Court will also ban do away with the prohibition on firearms as attached to protective orders. This is a 3-judge panel that was appointed under very political circumstances. And this, if anything, is indicative that the Bruin test actually does not adequately capture the information that we have currently in existence with regards to public health and public safety, and therefore should not be applied to other cases that are coming towards circuit courts and Supreme Court. We do know that this has no impact, right, on Virginia law and the current prohibitions that are in effect for domestic abusers. We are going to be working with national partners on amicus briefs and on making sure that we have good outcomes at the federal level around this particular issue. And I will stop there. I know I've talked a lot.
Joan, are there any questions for Jonathan?
No, there are not.
Yeah, we have one in the room.
And I'd like to know whether your organization is able, by its own rules, to be active during campaign season in Virginia elections.
Did you hear the question, Jonathan?
I did. Unfortunately, we're not. So one of the things, we're a 501c3, and we are not allowed to be a part of campaign season in the way that some other agencies are. But we do a lot of work to engage survivors and get them registered as voters in the context of our shelter programs and rape crisis centers, and make sure that they understand what's at stake every election cycle, that they have rides to the polls, and that they are plugged into folks like you so that they can feel activated around the issues that impact survivors. We can do things like that, like a campaign.
Deb, a question did sneak in under the wire. Can Jonathan say what that case is again? The court case you were talking about?
Yeah, US versus Rahimi. So this is a Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals case that was a ruling that was issued last Thursday, I believe. They vacated the sentence of a defendant, Zaki Rahimi, resulting from his conviction under the federal provision that barred him from owning weapons because he was subject to a protective order. The decision applies in Texas, Mississippi, and Louisiana, but nowhere else across the nation. And essentially, their ruling found that this 3-judge panel believed that the prohibitions attached to protective orders, the firearm prohibitions attached to protective orders, was unconstitutional based on the Bruin test. And not to get too in the weeds, but the Supreme Court recently decided that they were going to view things through the lens, any case that came forward, through the lens of our founding fathers in 1791 when they were, creating these amendments and, refining the Constitution. And as we know, women couldn't vote then. And as we know, we had chattel slavery was in existence and all sorts of issues. So when you look at the domestic violence and firearms through that lens, it's obvious that you're not going to consider the lethality and unique dangerous that firearms pose to domestic violence victims if you're viewing it through the lens of a founding father in 1791 or 1776. So that is wildly irresponsible and just not a good way to think about the constitutionality of current laws.
Jonathan, thank you. And let's touch base offline to make sure that LWV-US is putting in an amicus brief in that. I think I speak for all of our members in saying that we feel that that would be important to be represented at that federal level. So thank you. Thanks to Joan and Denise. Things were a little crazy today with people's schedules. And so thank you for your flexibility. Thank all of our speakers for their flexibility. Thanks our members for joining us. And thank you especially to our members who are here in person. Great to see Anne. Haven't seen Anne. So we will be virtual the next and final 2 weeks. And I just dropped the link into the chat. So make sure that you register so you get that link and you can join us the next 2 weeks. Watch out for action alerts. Things are going to move quickly and we so appreciate you. So thanks for joining us and have a great week.